Away for a moment. All right. On behalf of each and all of our communities, Cottage Grove and Monona, on behalf of the Monona Grove School Board members and everyone present, I welcome you to tonight's annual meeting. First off, we need a call to order, which we've now done, I hope. The declaration of public notice has been given. That's been established. And I'd also like to recognize the school board members who are seated with you tonight. And I don't know if you'd like to please stand so folks can see you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you. We now need to elect a chairperson to facilitate tonight's meeting. Do we have nominations? I'm sorry? Thank you. Thank you. We currently have 2 nominations, one Dan Olson and myself, Jennifer Smith. Any other nominations? I understand that, nope, okay. We need then a vote from the audience. If you take a moment, so Dan Olson or Jennifer Smith to facilitate tonight's meeting. All right, all those in favor of having Dan, would you please raise your hand? Thank you. All those in favor of Jennifer Smith, please raise your hand. Thank you. Dan, I hope that works okay for you. All right. Thank you very much for your vote of confidence. I will do my utmost, and I do want to also feature that we have a parliamentarian with us tonight, should there be any questions on procedure. Okay. Excuse me. I do need to make the announcement for availability of the minutes from the 2016 annual meeting, and those should be available in your document. Okay. And at this time, we'll shift gears and have our superintendent's report from Dan Olson.
Oops. Okay, thank you, Jennifer. This evening, I'd like to talk about 3 topics. And just a very brief update on the work that we've done this past year on our strategic plan. Secondly, we're in our 2nd year after our operational referendum, and speak briefly about how some of the things that we've been able to do with the funds that have been available from the operational budget. And then third, talk about our facilities planning update. And the strategic plan, the outline is actually in your documents that you received tonight, so I won't go through piece by piece, but what I'd like to do is just talk just briefly about the process and how we use the strategic plan as a working document in the district. And the whole purpose of the strategic plan is really to provide focus. If you look at the 5 specific strategy areas, those were developed by a community stakeholder committee 2 years ago, and we talked about some of the specific areas that we would like to address. It's really in the spirit of continuous improvement. And then within that framework, each of our schools develop school improvement plans. We use a process known as the PDSA process, which stands for Plan, Study, Do, and Act. And then we summarize our results and track our data each year, and then we make new goals for the next year. And so in the annual report booklet that was also available tonight, you'll see a short summary of the results of this past year, and then as well, there's a link to the PowerPoint, which will be available electronically on our website, that has a much more detailed report as well. So about an 11-page report of all the 5 areas and exactly what our goals were, how we're progressing, and then our new goals for the next year. So I just wanted to point out that that is information that's available. It's really important to the work that we do throughout the year. Secondly, to talk briefly again about the operational referendum. If you recall, it was back in the spring of 2016 that the voters passed an operational referendum, and that was to approve additional $2.6 million in funds to exceed the revenue limits. That's for the operations of the school district. That was not specifically for facilities. And we talked about 5 areas that we wanted to focus on with needs with that money as well. And again, this document is in your booklet, so I won't read through all of the bullet points, but we do have a number of specific areas where we've been able to increase our budget in each of those areas each of the last 2 years, and the things in the bullet points are the things specifically that we're able to address this past school year. And so that will be a recurring. Now, it's not the exact same in each year. Some of those funds might shift a little bit more heavily from one area to the other, but in general, it's allowed us to increase our operating budget in each of those key areas year after year, where areas that we felt in the past because of budget reductions, things were either put on hold or even deferred, and we feel really good about the progress we've made these past 2 years and will continue. If you recall, it's a 5-year operational referendum, and so in 2021, at that point, will need to be revisited whether it expires, it sunsets at that point, and then determination will be made where the funding is at the district at that time. Okay, so we have the areas of curriculum, technology, and personnel. The biggest thing in personnel I'd like to point out is the #1 priority has been class size. So we've been able to hire additional teachers each year to either maintain or in some cases reduce class size to our goals where we'd like to be at. And we feel that for the first time in several years that we have been able to reach our class size goals in every grade level. So it's something we feel really good about. And then the equipment purchases and facility maintenance is also a part of that. Where we have our capital projects, we've had a number of deferred maintenance items over the years, and we've been able to make some inroads with that the last couple of years as well. Okay, and the third thing I'd like to talk tonight about is our facilities planning. And again, all this information is available on our website. There's a little bit in the booklets. But just to recall, going back 2 years ago, in 2015, the board approved an ad hoc committee of a long-range facilities planning committee. And the purpose of that work at that time was really to do an assessment of our facilities and gathering of information. So the committee members, it was community stakeholders as well as board members, administrators, teachers, and really a cross-section of a number of individuals. And they toured our facilities, assessed our capacity, utilization, looked at the condition systems. We looked at some growth patterns. We had an enrollment growth study done. And then the result was some recommendations for further study moving on in the future. We did work with an architectural firm and construction management firm to help us put together that study where they helped do the assessment of our building needs. And the summary of the recommendations, there were really 3 major summaries. Okay, the first is that the actual facility study be adopted by the board to use as a framework for district decisions. Okay, that actual facility study is a very large document. It's a couple-inch thick 3-ring binder, but the entire study is available on our website. So that's an assessment of all of our district buildings at that time as far as what the needs were moving forward. Then the second recommendation was to continue study in those next 5 key areas to talk about grade level configuration. So in the future, as we make any decisions about building facilities that we have, are we going to continue with the grade configurations that we currently have? If there are any changes done, what are options that would be viable to maintain equity amongst all of our schools? And so it really wasn't a decision making to determine what it should look like, but more the recommendation is that's something that needs to be determined in the future. The building capacity and utilization. As I mentioned, there was some capacity studies, enrollment studies, and to really firm that up to determine, okay, we looked at capacity in a number of different areas. Functional capacity based upon things like gym space, common space, versus square footage capacity versus how many classrooms do we have and compared to what our board goals are on class size. So those are all numbers that need to be taken into consideration and to really look forward and making some decisions about where we feel that those tipping points are with capacity with the buildings. The capital maintenance, there were identified over $14 million of deferred maintenance that needs to be done over the years. Not all of it needs to be done now, but it was a comprehensive list of the maintenance needs in all of our district buildings. And so the recommendation, of course, is to continue and have a firm capital maintenance plan, to address those areas. There were recommendations with regard to district properties. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight in a later agenda item. And part of that recommendation was to look at the surplus properties that the district is currently not utilizing, and look at recommendations of perhaps selling some of those properties, as well as looking at properties that might be available for the future to accommodate future growth. And so we're going to talk more specifically about that tonight and exactly what that recommendation might look like. And then the last thing they looked at were our athletics and co-curriculars, in particular our outdoor athletic facilities, where we have great partnerships right now with the City of Monona and Village of Cottage Grove, but we really have some needs as far as district-owned properties and travel and having availability in enough practice areas as well as game areas. And so again, no decisions were made, but the recommendation was further study and that we do need to address some of those areas in the future. All those recommendations, there was a lot of detail to each of those 5 bullet points. Again, all that information is available on our website, and that's something that we'll be sharing out, as we move forward as well to, I should say, work off of as we move forward. And then the last piece, proceeding to phase 2, to engage an architectural and construction management firm to support these recommendations and implement those above. So that is where we're at now, is moving to phase 2, where we have our baseline study and the information, and now is to go to the next step. What are we going to do moving forward and making decisions? And so with that, our board has developed a committee, and actually jumping ahead a little bit, again, without reading through all those bullet points, these are some of the things that will happen in phase 2. And so thus far the board has engaged with an architectural firm, is Epstein Ewan Architects. That's the same group that assisted us in facilitating the phase 1 study. And these are bullet points taken directly from the RFP as to what we expect them to help us facilitate this process in making some future recommendations. Okay, and then along with that, to facilitate that work, the board has approved the creation of a facilities advisory committee. So in August, they created a charge of the committee to look at those needs, and we just are finalizing putting that committee together, and that committee will begin meeting later this month. And with the idea that the committee will have regular communication with our Board of Education, and then that at some point in the spring, most likely, we'll go out to the community and survey and get community feedback on options for future facilities work, and with the board ultimately making some decisions next July or August about what we're going to do with facilities in the future. So it's really a year-long process, and one of the key things that really important is we have the continued communication along the way, and that's part of our charge as well, is to every step of this process to make sure we're engaging the entire community, getting that feedback, and then with the decisions to come in the future. Okay. And I jumped ahead a little bit already, and this is the timeline that I mentioned. And again, I'll refer you to our district website, as well as in the back of the annual report booklet is a one-page summary as well of the future facilities work. But we have created a facilities planning web page dedicated strictly to our facilities planning, and it's something that we'll want to continually put our updated information as we go along in the planning process. Okay, with that, we'll take an opportunity if anyone has any questions on any of the areas that I spoke to this evening. Yes?
How long we're still paying on the old referendum?
The operational referendum or previous facilities?
The one that built the school.
Okay, I'm actually going to defer to Jared Rosing, our business manager, and I think that's in the debt service is in the report. Okay, on page 18 in the booklet tonight shows all the debt service and when that debt expires. Okay, May of 2026 specifically for the debt for this building. Okay.
referendum that we voted on?
That would have been that would have been a separate referendum at the time that this building was built, approximately 10 years ago. The operational referendum just 2 years ago was not at all for facilities. That is strictly for operating budget. So that is only a 5-year window. That sunsets 3 years from now.
Build another building, how much longer would that one involve payments for taxpayers?
Well, we're not anywhere close to making that decision yet, but typically when there's a facilities referendum, most districts do a 20-year bond on facilities. Now, one of the things that when you look, and Jared can speak to this more when he gives his financial report, but you'll see a number of different separate debt, in that debt schedule, and part of that is because as interest rates, vary and lower, there's a lot of refinancing that goes on to take advantage of lower interest rates, and that's why you see some of those cases, those years, spread out, so long. Okay. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, go ahead.
We've been told that the school district benefits as new subdivisions go in. Can you explain how that is?
Well, I'm not sure what the definition of benefits means. There's a lot of pieces to that. Property values certainly have a component in the state equalization aid formula. And, again, Jared can probably speak to that a little bit more when he does his budget report, but I'm not so sure that, I guess I'm not sure what that might mean when someone says the district benefits. There's a lot of factors that growth has in the district. Number of students certainly plays into as well. When we're talking about money and equalization aid, certainly the number of students that you have is a key factor in that. And so generally, the more students you have, the more aid that's received. But then, of course, there's the cost of educating those students as well. So, there's always a balance there as to what, how that may impact our district budget.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes?
Percentage have children, don't have children. Could you just discuss how that was chosen and by who?
Sure. So we'll be making those names public very shortly. I guess I wouldn't do that yet tonight because we just finalized the committee, but we'll be putting that out prior to their beginning of the work, I would say within this next week. But the criteria, and this was part of the charge of the board as they put together this committee, was that it's key that it was a diverse group with various backgrounds and to make sure that we tried to have it very representative of all of our communities in the district. So there was great care to be taken to make sure that we have an equal number of representatives from the city of Monona as well as village and town of Cottage Grove. To make sure that we have fairly equal representation of people who currently have students in the system versus people who may not. And looking at, basically other backgrounds, people that have done work with the district or not. So as far as the process, our board members, recommended names. I was very involved as well. And then by board policy, ultimately the list of names, it was left to me to make the final recommendation to our board president, Jennifer Smith, who then would approve the committee.
How many names do you have initially, and what would be a question, 3 questions you would ask, and what would be a good answer and a bad answer?
Well, we didn't interview people to be in the committee. Okay, and so basically, to start with, we looked at folks who served on the original long-range facilities planning committee. All of those folks were invited to continue back because of the knowledge base that they've had. We looked at people who were on our strategic planning committee from 2 years ago as well, and invited a number of those folks. And then, again, looked at other people that basically, like I said, our board members had an opportunity to recommend folks that they thought would help, put together a diverse group. but there was not an interview process. Okay. Any other questions this evening? Yes? Correct.
Cottage Grove or Monona?
Correct. It was the Board of Education who is the Board of Education's advisory committee. Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
Did you give the option to anybody else to join that committee outside of the people that knew everybody on the board?
Well, I wouldn't say that necessarily everyone, not every person on there was, you know, some of the nominations came from board members, some came from myself, and some, you know, from other people that may have recommended, you know, names.
So you didn't offer it up to everybody?
It was not put out as an open, you know,
and why is that?
Because we felt it was important to limit the size of the committee, and so part of the charge as well was to have a maximum of 20, and again, the goal was to have you know, a diverse group of that 20.
Wouldn't that make that board biased then? If they've already been on the committee and were elected by the board?
Well, again, ultimately, it's the Board of Education's job to make final decisions. The board took the extra step, instead of doing all the work themselves, is to put together this advisory committee so that we would have various viewpoints, you know, involved and reviewing, you know, the information moving forward. Okay. Yes, Mike.
Secondarily, there was another group that you went to get names. Could you tell us who those other people, other than the board members and yourself, were? That should be something that could be disclosed. You said there was another group that you contacted for names. Could you tell us who those were?
Well, personally, I asked some of our principals, you know, of folks that they may know, whether they be parents or past parents or people they know in the community. A couple people that I've worked with in the community and asked specifically for recommendations as well.
So it's fair to say you did ask from folks who were not associated with the school district in some manner, and you'd be willing to disclose those sources?
To answer the first question, yes. I basically took any input that I could from people. So I just spoke with a number of individuals, and this again with myself personally. I can't speak for the, you know, the other board members as well.
And so one final question. So nowhere did the board, as with some other committees that they put together where you've sought people to apply, there was a decision made, I'm assuming at some board meeting. Could you possibly provide meeting minutes at some point, or we can get a hold of or see where this decision was made and how that was noticed on your meetings? Because again, people would not have been able to participate if they didn't know.
Sure. The actual document, I believe, is already posted on our website, but it is available. So the actual document the board approved it included the charge of the committee, it included the committee makeup and how that committee was to be chosen, and then as well as the timeline.
Again, I'll ask the question. So can we get the dates so people can go back and look at your board agenda to determine if reasonably they could have determined what you were discussing?
Sure.
And would they have had the opportunity to show up? Because on some of the board meeting agendas, it's not always clear. So if we had a date, I think at least people could go back and look for their purpose.
Sure. It was August 23rd was the date of the approval of the committee, and it was noticed specifically for that, for the possible creation of a facilities advisory committee. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
We move now to the financial report, item F, which is in your document, pages 11 and 12. And again, I will not be going through all the digits, but I will remind everyone that we do experience a yearly audit, and that Wagner CPAs conduct that audit, and that those documents are open record and available. Okay. At this time, we'll move to item G, the budget hearing, and Jared Rosing, our Director of Business Services.
Good evening, and as Jennifer had noted, my name is Jared Rosing. I'm the Director of Business Services with the district. I do want to point out that the booklet that is classified as the annual meeting budget hearing booklet is going to be referenced throughout the PowerPoint. I didn't take everything that was in this booklet and put in the PowerPoint. Obviously, there's lots of information we can talk about when we talk about school finance. It can be definitely a very complex topic, and it also can be an enjoyable topic for certain individuals, myself included. So the financial side of things and the budget hearing side of things starts on page 13 of the annual meeting booklets. And just to note, what Jennifer stated, that the district does go through an annual audit. That has been completed. The district will receive its final documents that will be published on our websites under Business Services. We typically receive those documents late January, early February. But if you are interested in finding out, because I didn't put all that information in the budget document, if you are interested in finding out how we actually spent our money down to a line item, you're more than welcome to. DPI does release that information as well. We've just submitted that information last week per the audit. So, and I like to start out the conversation or the presentation letting anybody know that this is sort of a high-level presentation, because we can go really, really deep, and we could be here for hours upon hours. I'm always happy to have conversations with individuals, if that means one-on-one, setting up small groups in the community. More than happy to talk about our budget. I think it's very important that our budget's very transparent and lets individuals know how we're spending their money. Before we get into the demographics of our districts, our fiscal year actually starts on January 1st. So we're actually, 4 or 5 months into it, and as you'll see at the conclusion of my budget, our actual numbers are not set in stone yet. So July 1st. So what will happen is we will have our third Friday count in September, and we still haven't received our certification for equalization, which will happen in the middle of October. Property valuations are just coming in, so ultimately, we're using numbers based off estimates, and the board will actually approve the final budget at the end of October, and encourage individuals to come to that board meeting so they can hear that. So just starting out with our demographics, this is all the municipalities that make up the Monona Grove School District. How I've broken this out is by property valuation. Doesn't mean that that's the number of students that are attending our schools, but the city of Monona makes up almost 53% of our property valuation. The village of Cottage Grove comes in next, and then as you can see, we have very small portions of our property in the city of Madison. These percentages are using the 16-17 valuations, and the purpose that we use that is the numbers just were released to us. We are using an estimated increase of about 3%, and so you can see why we're using that. And to go back to the question that was asked to Superintendent Olson, why is additional subdivisions helpful to the district? When we talk about valuations, it also allows us to spread out our tax levy. So if we have a tax levy that's driven off of our revenue limits, which I will speak to shortly, that's based off students, that's a total dollar amount. What we get from the state and whatever's remaining that we don't get from the state is divided out between the property valuation. So the more houses or more commercial properties that we have, that we can spread out that total levy, that's where you're seeing that on your tax thing. So we're anticipating a 3%. I just happened to take a look before the meeting tonight, and we're actually going to see a 4% growth in valuation. So some of that is obviously you have your annual assessments where those happen, but it's when new properties come online, we're able to take that property valuation and spread out our total tax levy. This just gives you a graph of how the equalization value history has happened. Obviously, you can look back at 2011, 12, and then in 13 when when we saw the economy sort of decrease, we experienced that as well. in our property values. But then in the last 3 years, we've seen that continuous growth in property values, ranging at that 3%, and that was the purpose of us using that as an estimate, and continuing to see that. What happens here too is if there are TIF districts that are in municipalities and they come offline, which our next one will be coming offline in 2018, and that's in the city of Monona, we will see a larger growth in that year. That doesn't mean that we had new property. It means that the property that was in that TID is now back on the tax roll, which will definitely help when we look at the mill rates. It's exciting to see so many individuals here, and I know I always include this in my annual report. I think it's important to understand that we are district buildings. We currently have 3 elementary schools, Cottage Grove, Taylor Prairie, and Winnequa. Our 1 middle school we're at tonight, Glacial Drumlin, and our high school that's located in Monona. We have our district office, which is actually the old Nichols building. And that doesn't just house the district administration, it also houses our MG21 district charter school and our Dane County School to Work program, which we actually rent out. It's a consortium. Their headquarters in that building, leaving us with really about 3 or 4 empty classrooms where we actually use for storage for the district. So when we look at that building, it looks large from the outside, but it's completely full of utilization through the district. And then other buildings, we have Maywood Elementary, which is located in Monona, that we currently lease to the Madison School District for a dual language program, which we as well benefit from revenue, in addition to being able to send 5 of our students at each grade level there. So it's an opportunity to expand educational opportunities for our students that we might not be able to provide in-house. So now let's get into the meat of the conversation. Public school funding is really the district receives a majority of our revenue from 2 sources. State aid, and when I say state aid, a lot of people refer to this portion of equalization aid. The formula goes back a long ways, and then local property taxes. And how I like to explain this is they are, counterbalancing forces. So if the district receives additional equalization aid, does not give the district additional funds to use towards educational programs, what it does is it lowers the amount that is actually passed on to property taxpayers for their school portion of their tax bill. However, as we walk through the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit more about per pupil aid. This is something that has been more of an initiative in our state budget, really going back to 2014. So how it all really works is the district is under what we call revenue limits. And really majority of all of our revenue, other than some of the small school fees that we collect, open enrollment that we receive from other schools for sending their children here, is really driven under revenue limits. And revenue limits are based on our enrollments and a base dollar amount that's been set from prior years. So currently we can collect approximately $10,680 per resident student that comes in. Now when we talk about revenue limits, so if we have a new family that moves in our district and they have 1 child, we only get to count 1/3 of that child the first year. The second year we get to count 2/3 of that student, and the 3rd year. So really when we talk about growth, a resident it only gives us 1/3, so it's a 3-year rolling average on the revenue limits. So once they've been here for 3 years, we get that full FTE, we can multiply it by that $10,600. That gives us our total revenue that we can collect. Then the state, in the middle of October, will give us what is called the equalization aid payments, and whatever's the difference from our total levy or our total revenue limit from the equalization aid is what is passed along, what we call our total levy to our property taxpayers. It was really, the revenue limits were established back in 1993. Prior to that, the annual meeting, the budget hearing, was an opportunity where we presented the budget, and every year the budget, the electorate would be able to approve that at that meeting, and then that's what was set and how much was passed along to taxpayers. Like I said, it fluctuates with changes in enrollments and state aid. The other thing that's not up here is debt. When we talk about debt and we talk about referendum approved debt, obviously when the referendum is approved and we go out and sell that debt, there is a debt schedule. So if we talk about 1 year, this is the dollar amount, next year it might go up, and that is something that will be incorporated into the revenue limits. For a number of years, revenue limits, and this is how the state really assisted funding schools. What they did is on an annual basis or during the budgeting process, they would determine how much money was to be added on to revenue limits. And when they did that, they also had to determine how that was going to affect property taxes. And if they wanted to maintain property taxes, they had to also increase the pot of money that was on the equalization aid side. So back in 2010, there actually was a reduction to all of our revenue limits by 5.5%. At the same time, the district was able to make changes to its employee benefits and to able to sort of hopefully fix some of the inequities, but also to help balance the budget. So as you can see, over the last number of years, our revenue limit has stayed flat on that per pupil basis. So in order for us to collect additional funds through revenue limits, we need to experience student growth, which, as Superintendent Olson also stated, is if you have student growth, there's also costs that come along with it. So talking about equalization and per pupil aid. So equalization aid formula is really dependent on a number of things. There are 3 tiers of that, and the purpose of the equalization aid program was really to equalize property and the ability for property taxpayers to help support their local school district. We're classified as a negative aided district, which means that in the equalization aid formula, we receive, they take a little bit of our money away because we are classified as a property-rich school district, which means they take that equalization value and the number of students that we have, and they determine that this is how much per student you have property value. So the equalization aid reduces our tax levy. And this year, we are actually based on the formula, and it's sort of called shared spending, because all the school districts submit their dollar amounts, and depending on what that looks like, then that's what calculates our equalization aid along with property values. We are estimated to receive an increase of just over $800,000, which is great news for us. That will definitely reduce the amount that is passed along the tax levy. The next item that I want to talk about is the per pupil aid. So since we haven't seen the revenue limits necessarily increase per pupil, this is what the state has put into the state budget to assist districts in receiving that. Last year in 2016-17, the district received $250 per pupil. And then this budget that was recently signed in, we're receiving an additional $200,000. So what does that mean to our revenues? In addition to enrollment growth that we're receiving, we're also going to be able to receive an additional just over $600,000 in per pupil aid from the year before, which will help us in our balancing of our budget. And as you can see, this is just a graph that shows, you know, how equalization aid goes. And if you overlap the two with the tax levy and equalization aid, so if you see equalization aid going up, you usually see your tax levy going down or your mill rate going down. If you see equalization aid the opposite, then the opposite happens on the property tax side. So getting into the 2017-2018 budget. So one of the requirements for the school district is we did publish that in the Herald Independence, but actually our budgeting process actually starts back in January. And I say back in January because our principals start working with their staff. One of the things that we've made some recent changes to is instead of necessarily giving our buildings a per pupil allocation, we've moved to what we classify as zero-based budgeting. Zero-based budgeting does require a lot more time, and it is a lot more work for everybody from the classroom teachers to building clerical to building administration to district administration. The reason we've done that is if we're truly going to sit in front of our community and say that we have a mission and vision statement, and we're truly here to educate students, we need to be able to take the funds on an annual basis and put those in certain areas based on the needs of our students. Our students are not always the same students from year to year. We have new students move in, there are different types of need, if that's ELL, if that's Title I, if there's if our free and reduced numbers are going up, those are areas that we need to make sure that we focus on. So that's the benefit of zero-based budgeting. It allows our buildings to look at different sites of initiatives and where the money needs to go to help educate our students. And then ultimately, we receive the results that we're starting to be able to report back out in our annual report on the way that our students are performing. As Superintendent Olson had mentioned, this is the second year of our operational referendum. So just to mention that, we had the $2.6 million. So when the $2.6 million goes into our revenue limits, that's above and beyond, but it's not 2.6 and then that's in, and then we add another 2.6. 2.6 goes in, we run our budget year, 2.6 comes back out, and then prior to us going back out and approving another budget or tax levy, that 2.6 goes back in. So it's not a compounding number, but it is a flat 2.6 that we will continue to add to our revenue limits until that expires. We're very pleased that we got the per pupil aid increase of $200, and we're able to present a balanced budget, and we are actually proposing a total tax levy of $27,371,132 this evening. So school districts don't necessarily just get to determine how they're going to code or how they're going to report out their funds. DPI, the Department of Public Instruction, is very specific on how things need to be reported. So when we talk through things tonight, we're going to really focus on Fund 10 and Fund 27. Those are the two areas that really focus on the educational needs of our students. Fund 10 is where we put all of our expenditures related to the general operations and our general education of our students. Fund 27 is special education, so anything that's related to students with IEPs or under the special education criteria, that is actually reported in Fund 27. The district receives funds from the state and federal government for that. However, as a district, that does not cover all of our expenditures in Fund 27, so we actually transfer money out of Fund 10 over to Fund 27 to cover those costs. We're going to talk about debt service a little bit later, but there are two funds with that. There's Fund 38, which means that's debt that the district has went out and borrowed, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit later in the concept of the land purchase. That's not referendum approved. So that means it has to fall within our regular budget, but it's pulled out of Fund 10 for that dollar amount. Fund 39 is with referendum approved debt. That's not the operational side of things. That's not the operational referendum. That's specifically if the district went to referendum and asked for a new building or to purchase land, we separate that out and there's a debt schedule that's presented. If and when we need to build a building, Fund 40 is where all that's run out. We want to make sure that that's kept separate for transparency reasons. Fund 50 is our school nutrition program. I'm pleased to say that every single year for the last 5 years, it's been a self-supportive program, which means that we continue to serve the needs of our students through federal regulations, which sometimes is challenging, but we're not taking money out of Fund 10 and supplementing our school nutrition program, where there are a number of schools across the state of Wisconsin that does that. So when you have to take money out of Fund 10, that's taking money pretty much out of the classrooms. Fund 80 is our community service fund, and we'll talk a little bit how we use money there, but that's really funds that help us set up things for the whole community. It does not need to be for individuals that are in our school. The purpose of it is to be able to offer camps for everyone in our district, allows for us to be able to provide communication above and beyond just school events for the district. And then Fund 99 is really a place for us to run funds through if we are the fiscal agent for an organization. So I had mentioned that Dane County School to Work rents part of our building at Nichols. We are also their fiscal agent. So we want to make sure that stays out of Fund 10 because that's truly not a cost to this district. It's a shared cost, and we act as their fiscal agents. So as we move into Fund 10, where a majority of all of our budgeting happens, you will see that we are proposing a general fund budget of $40,663,000. And how that's really developed out, you can see our revenues here match our expenditures. One of the things is, like I said, DPI is very specific on how we code things. So when we start talking about local sources up here, we're looking at $22,104,000. That's comprised of property property taxes that we collect for the purpose of general funds, and any student fees that we collect for back to school, or any of our admissions to our athletic events. The next down, that 2.5 million, that's called interdistrict payments. Those are payments that we receive from other districts for open enrollments. So as you can see, last year we received $2,468,000. We're anticipating an increase, and that's not because we're asking for additional students. It's because on an annual basis, DBA comes out and gives us a per pupil amount, and so that's what we're anticipating there. State sources, this is where we're talking about that equalization aid and that per pupil aid. So you can see that we're definitely seeing a significant increase to $15,415,000 there. Federal sources, we're predicting a decrease, and part of that is that we're going to see less funding through Title I and some of our federal grants that are coming through on the federal budget side. Other sources, such as sources 800s and 900s, those are things that if we were going to sell fixed assets like computers, being able to return those, or in the accounting world, there always has to be an in and an out. So if we sell something, or if we're going to refinance, there's always some types of fees and money that comes back in, but ultimately also shows up on the expenditure side. That's what's quoted under the all expenditure side of things. What we've been able to do is we have a great partnership with on our IT side. So when we do recycle things out, it's not going to the landfill. We're recycling it. We're getting a little bit of money from that. On the expenditure side, we're required to report out in 3 sides of things: instructional, support services, and non-program transactions. And what I want to say is it does become challenging because there are specific requirements of where we need to code things. For prime example, part of our referendum was that we fully funded our technology plan, which means that 3rd grade through 12th grade, we were 1-to-1. Well, when you buy technology, you're supposed to code it to a 200,000, which puts it in support services. Well, really now that's an instructional thing. So it makes it looking like that there are support services continue to increase more and more, but we really focus as a district to put it into the instructional side, into the classroom. So you're going to see that we're proposing a budget of $19,655,000 in the instructional. Support services is $15,532,000, and our non-program transaction that's the dollar amount that we're transferring out of Fund 10 into Fund 27 for special education, along with any payments that we make to other districts that leave us for open enrollment, which I can tell you is below $150,000. We're definitely a school of choice. Moving on to special project funds, this is where Fund 21 and 27 come into play. Fund 21 is where we run through all of our donations that we receive from the community, which we're very grateful for. And so where that fund balance of $73,970, that's really our donations that we receive. That $6,535,000 is because we need to report that together, and I can tell you that our special education budget alone is $6.2 million when we talk about special education. This graph, so when we always talk about budgeting, we then combine Fund 10 and 27 because those are our true educational costs. And so when you can see on our revenue side, majority of our funding in our school district comes from local revenue, and 37% of that is coming from the state. Now, if in other school districts across the state, that's going to be flip-flopped. You're going to be in areas where it's a very rural school district, and the state is giving them more support because they're not able to support that through their local property taxes. And then on the revenue side of or on the expenditure sides, how do we really spend that? And there are really a number of areas that we break that down into. Obviously, for us, the biggest area in most school districts is salary and benefits. Well, it's pretty simple and straightforward when we talk about salaries, but when we talk about benefits, there's a lot of variations between schools. But when we're talking about benefits, we're talking about the Wisconsin retirement system, which prior to 2010, the district paid 100% of that. The district currently only pays 50% of an employee's Wisconsin retirements on an annual basis. This requires the district's health and dental, which last year we switched our health and dental and saw some significant savings, and then our post-employment benefits. And then as we work our way down, when we talk about purchase services, that's our transportation budget, which, you know, we are a school district that's not continuous, which means that we have 7 miles of Madison that divides us. So when you compare our transportation budgets in between, we might be a little higher, and that's not because we necessarily contract out. It's we transport a number of our students, which is great to be able to do that. The other area is we don't hire our own short-term substitutes, which means that when there's a sick day for a certified staff member that works with students, we get a substitute for them. Those are hired through Teachers on Call, and those are also reported in the purchase service side of things. Non-capital objects are our supplies, our textbooks, workbooks. Capital objects are pretty much our equipment. Insurance or debt retirement would be our capital lease payments. Before we always were leasing our technology because we couldn't necessarily buy it on an annual basis. Our insurance is not health insurance. This is our liability insurance, our workers' comp, and our property insurance. Transfers is special education, and then other objects, which is less than $190,000 out of our $40 million budget, is district dues, fees, and prior year expenditures. So this is just a graph that shows you that 77% of our expenditures goes to hiring excellent staff in our district. Moving on to our debt service, as I had mentioned before, you're going to be able to find there's Fund 38 and Fund 39. One is referendum approved, and the other is the Board of Education has the authority to borrow, but that is not added on separately, but we do report it out separately. You can find the detail in your annual report on pages 17 and 20. And what I'm going to tell you is if you go to page 18, what we've done is we put together all of our outstanding debts. So you can see what the original issuance amount was, what the type of borrowing was, and which includes, they're all over the board between, you know, taxable general obligation and refunding bonds, improvement bonds. But what the district has done a couple of years ago is we worked really hard on refinancing that when we saw the interest rates being low. And it wasn't for the purpose of extending our debt payments. It was to take advantage of over $1 million of interest savings, which ultimately, most of that all happened in Fund 39, which resulted in property tax relief without extending some of our payments. You can see from this that when the date was borrowed, what the description of the borrowing was, how much principal is remaining, and how much interest is remaining. And then on the last column is the final payment. What I can tell you is that May of 2034, as of today, would be our last principal payment on any type of debt that we have. Obviously, as a growing district, that might be changing. It could be shorter if we saw interest rates decrease again and we go back out to refinance, we can get those shorter. But as of right now, we've refinanced and the interest rates are starting to climb again, so we are in a situation where we don't have any current plans to refinance. This just shows you that between Fund 38 and Fund 39, we actually have a $5,571,000 budgets for debts, principal, and interest. You'll notice that on the revenue side of things, that's a little different because the way our debt services and our budget runs. When we go into our tax levy, that's based on a calendar year, so January of 18. However, our budget runs from July to June. So those do over. Yeah. Oh. Perfect. No problem. I will make sure. So on the debt side, we are looking at $5,571,000 for expenditures. This schedule here just shows you how our outstanding principal and interest payments are looking on Fund 38. So whenever we do go out for a borrow, we're looking at those schedules. We don't want to just continue to add on top of that and have all different things. So yes, there looks like there's peaks and valleys here, but this is just one portion of our debt service. If you look at the next side of things. Fund 39 is where our big debt borrowing is, because that's for buildings and land. You can see that after 2018-19, a number of our debt payments decreased there, which allows us to, when we structure things. But when you look at the total debt service, you're starting to see that we're just going to continue to decrease that mill rate, or the total that we're levying for debt service. Fund 50, school food service funds, or what we classify it as school nutrition funds. You can see we've been very successful. We've been able to, this is not something that the district sets out at the beginning of the year, is we raise our lunch prices because the federal government requires us to do that. We have good participation in our school nutrition program, and we've been able to keep our costs low, so we have been able to continue to receive additional revenue than expenditures on an annual basis. But what that does allow us to do is to be able to continue to update equipment. Obviously, it is the goal of the school nutrition program is to be able to provide a nutritious meal falling within the guidelines that are set forth, because we do participate in the federal lunch program and breakfast program. We are anticipating, we always go in the year budgeting for a balanced budget, just for the fact that, you know, we can't always guarantee that our kids are going to continue to stay there, but we try very hard. So we're looking at a budget of $1,347,000 on school food service fund. Fund 80. What we're doing here is actually helping pay for personnel and supplies for our facility that's used by the community. So if any of you have ever came to an after-school event that is offered or rented through an outside group, and there's custodians here, that overtime is charged to Fund 80. We have a very successful aquatics program beyond our high school aquatics program. We offer great swim lessons, which we continue to fill up on an annual basis. Part of our swim instructors, along with our lifeguards, salaries are coming out here. Last year and the year before, we dabbled into some summer recreational programs. Definitely got that into a situation where we're going to continue moving forward. And then our partnerships with our media personnel and supplies and school resource officers, which we have 2 going into this year. So we're anticipating an expenditure side of $385,000. And I'm not going to talk long about this, but since we are the fiscal agent, we do report out the last 2 years of information plus what's being budgeted for the Fund 99. These funds, obviously, as I said before, is fiscal agents, because we're their fiscal agent. So in summary, what does this mean? So we're actually looking at a total overall budget increase of 3%. When you think of health insurance at 7%, when you think of inflation, I think an increase of 3% is being very diligent in how we're utilizing the school budget. You can see that we're anticipating transferring $4.5 million from our general fund into special education. And as of right now, we don't have any plans to do any refinancing. So we have a total budget of all of our funds combined of $50,464,799. Now, what does that convert to? Because a lot of people don't care really what the school budget looks like, but what's it going to impact my taxes? You can see last year that we had 11.43% increase in our mill rate, or our tax levy. This year, we're proposing a decrease of just shy of 1%, of 0.47%. Part of it is because we're receiving an additional state aid. And the other part of it is that our referendum money is staying in there. So that 11.43% increase was due to that first initial payment of the $2.6 million. The mill rate. So because we're receiving additional equalization aid, last year our mill rate, so if you take your house value, this is a rough calculation because there's a lot of numbers that go into it, like the first dollar, there's the student credits that apply to your property taxes, but last year our mill rate was $13.89 per $1,000 of property assessed. This year we're proposing $13.36 per $1,000, and that actually is lower than 2013-14. I do got to say that part of that is because we are receiving an additional, $900,000 in equalization aid. Some of the amounts that are subject to change, obviously, as we talked about in the revenue limits, our revenue limit's not final. We won't have those final numbers until October 15th. That will make a change. And so we have our final membership count, our certification of equalization property values, and then our state aid calculations that will come into us. So really what the next steps are, part of this is that yes, October 2nd has happened, but we have to be prepared and publish the stuff in advance. So we just received our revenue property values from the Department of Revenue. We will receive our final state aid calculations, and then on October 25th, the board will take action on the final budget and any adjustments that potentially need to be made. So that actually concludes the probably long-winded budget explanation, but concludes the budget hearing portion, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you. Do we own 3 residential homes?
Yeah, so the 3 residential homes that we own are located right next to the high school. If you know where our tennis courts are, there's a house right in front of the tennis courts along Monona Drive, and then there are 2 houses that are behind the tennis courts on Jerome Street. So if you turn in to Cold Springs, there's 2 houses there.
Okay, so why do we own residential homes, and what's their educational purpose?
Well, those were purchased prior to the arrival. Part of it was when the high school was being rebuilt, I think there was some conversations of utilizing that property, purchasing those homes. One of the things is our tennis courts are only 6 courts. We would like to make them eventually someday 7 courts, or I think that was the goal, so we could host some of our WIA events instead of having our students necessarily travel to Ellis Place. But the other part of it is that when we purchased, or when we decided to build the high school, those lands were purchased with those houses. So that was part of the long-range facilities, was to look at those properties and how do we, what do we do with them going forward. So there is no educational value to them. They're being utilized as storage right now.
And what is preventing us from tearing down those and building, 7 courts or more?
So those properties are actually located in the city of Madison, and I'm not for sure if anybody's went through any planning work with the city of Madison, but we have to get approval from the city of Madison to either tear those houses down or to make any type of changes. In addition to that, the cost of those tennis court remodel or change would be more than what we have currently in our budgets. And the other part of it is there's a neighborhood association that would ultimately have to sign off on that, and based on the location and having some conversations, but I can tell you the conversations continue. But right now it's just working through the neighborhood association in the city of Madison. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, this brings us to item H, the adoption of tax levy. And for our purposes tonight, we'll need a motion from the floor. And when we vote on that motion, we're going to do that with hands tonight, just as a quick reminder. So we seek a motion. Thank you. Thank you. We need a second. Could you please state your name and address?
311 Asher Circle, Monona.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. All those in favor of the motion? Oh, I'm so sorry. Discussion, apologies.
the slide, Carrie Robbins, 2743 Pheasant Run.
Thank you, Carrie.
The slide says 23 million, but our booklet that we have tonight says 27 million
Thank you.
as the proposed motion. And I just wanted to pause quick and make sure that we propose it in the way that Jared is recommending.
Thank you. The correct amount would be 27. Okay.
The correct amount should be 27,371,132.
Thank you.
May I make a friendly amendment to correct it to the 27,371,132?
Yes, you may. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Do we have a second on the amendment? Okay. We need, pardon me, we need a second on the amendment before any discussion. Thank you. Thank you. All right.
I'm sorry, I got to get back to the houses that we own. Do we own any debt on those properties right now? We don't. How long have we had them?
Oh my gosh.
Late 90s, so over 20 years? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll return to our motion for the tax levy. We've corrected the amount. We have a friendly amendment. We have a motion and a second. At this time, we can take our vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the correction to 27, right, getting that correct, please show affirmation or approval by raising your hand. Thank you. All those opposed? Same. All right, the motion of the friendly amendment carries. Thank you. We will now return to the tax levy as corrected now. Again, all those in favor, please show that by raising your hand. Thank you. All those opposed? All right, the motion for the adoption of the tax levy for 27,371,132 passes. Thank you. This now takes us to item I, which is the authorization of salaries for school board members. As a quick reminder, board members will be abstaining from this vote, and we need a motion from the floor. Sure. It's okay.
Oh, you want me to do this again the right way?
Can we indulge you? Thank you.
Okay, John Weinberger, 5504 Healy Lane, Monona. I move that we set the 2017-18 annual salaries of school board members at $3,100.
Do we have a second?
Midwood Avenue in Monona.
Thank you. Okay. Any discussion? All right. At this time, we'll take a vote on this motion. Again, showing your support and affirmation, please raise your hand. All those in favor? Thank you. All those opposed? All right, the motion carries on the salaries for school board members for the upcoming year. Thank you. That takes us to item J, the reimbursement of school board members' related expenditures. And we'll need a motion from the floor.
350 Damascus Trail, Cottage Grove. Move to authorize the reimbursement of school board members for expenses incurred in the performance of duties.
Thank you. We need a second.
4574 American Way, Cottage Grove. Second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
What those expenses are?
I could. Jared says I can. From time to time, board members travel to attend WASB, or Wisconsin Association of School Board events and trainings, which are immensely helpful to keep us all up to date. So it would primarily be travel expenses and conferences and trainings that those funds would be used for. Thank you. Thanks for that. All right, we've got our motion, we've got our second. Any further discussion? Again, school board members will be abstaining from this vote. Okay. To show your affirmation or approval, all those in favor, please say, I'm so used to doing that. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. All those opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. That takes us to item K. This gives authorization to the school board to establish the date, time, and place for the 2018 annual meeting. And we need a motion from the floor.
242 Forreston Drive, Cottage Grove, move to authorize the school board to establish the date, time, and place of the 2018 annual meeting and budget hearing.
Thank you. And a second? Thank you.
913 Lindsay Court, Cottage Grove.
Thank you. Any discussion?
I'd just like to note that the date and time is statutorily set in July unless we have authorization to change it at this meeting.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, which is why we're here in October, right? Yes. All right, at this time, we will take our vote. Please indicate your support with the raising of hands. All those in favor? Thank you. All those opposed? All right, this authorization carries. Thank you. That takes us to item L, the approval of a resolution authorizing site acquisition and designating said site for potential school district buildings.
I, Carrie Robbins of 2743 Pheasant Run, move to approve the following resolution. Be it resolved by the electors of the Monona Grove School District, Dane County, Wisconsin, that the school board be authorized to acquire a site necessary for school district purposes and located as described in the following real estate description, which is incorporated herein by this reference, to be designated for potential school district buildings pursuant to sections 120.10, parens 5M, and parens 5 of the Wisconsin statutes. The approximately 40 acres located at 4490 Bus Road, Town of Cottage Grove, Dane County, Wisconsin, with a legal description of the southwest quarter of the southwest quarter, Section 5, Township 7N, Range 11E, Town of Cottage Grove, Dane County, Wisconsin.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I second Katie Kaiser, 4803 Roygan Terrace in Monona.
Thank you. And this would be time for discussion. Yeah. Do you
want to? Can you tell us what analysis was done with regards to this parcel in terms of any additional needs? Because right now you're asking us to purchase something. Has the district already had an analysis done? Is the site suitable? Does it have access For example, when Glacial Drumlin was built, there was quite a bit of disagreement between the village over the developer's costs and fees. Those were not calculated in. So to avoid those mistakes, I'm assuming that you have some analysis. Yeah. Nobody has seen that. Is that available?
Yes. So I won't repeat everything. It's in your packet, the last 2 pages as far as the information on the site. But at this point, the board has approved an offer to purchase with a number of contingencies. The first contingency is approval tonight at the annual meeting. The other contingencies are, there are a number of due diligence pieces, and 2 in particular that you referenced. We're in the process of scheduling a wetlands delineation as well as a site survey. And so we have 60 days in order to complete our due diligence, and then the sole discretion of the board to determine whether to follow through with the actual purchase or not. And so we're in the process of having that scheduled right now. That'll occur very shortly, and then we'll have those results, as well as the other analysis, as you mentioned, to make sure that it's a buildable property. Yes, and I believe the amount was $500. Yeah.
To the village's water and sewer lines, is it part of the expanded service area of the village? Would there be any additional cost that the district would have to incur to make the property developable, which is different than maybe other properties
Sure.
that are available, which has been an issue before? So I guess
Yep.
you're asking us to vote on something, and I haven't heard the answer. Transportation, water, sewer, all of that is accessible without additional costs.
Okay. So at this point, no, the property is in the town of Cottage Grove. It is not in the village. So the parcel just to the south has been annexed into the village, but this parcel at this point has not. So we've had preliminary discussions, but it has not gone to the village board yet. We have talked to the village planner and so on, but that would be something that would need to be done. So it's currently not part of the site.
By the school board to purchase any other site like the Helglen property, which is more downtown?
Okay. At this point, we've explored a number of sites, and this is the one that we've reached an agreement with the property owner. So we don't have, I will say, that particular site that you mentioned, no, we are not in negotiations, with at this time. And so I think all sites are still kind of being considered. Part of the recommendation from the previous long-range facilities planning was to initially look at properties that were adjacent to the Glacial Drumlin site. There's a number of advantages of being, connected to an existing site with potential of shared, services, parking, and that sort of thing. So no, we have not formally explored some of those other sites at this time.
I must have lost contact on how much farmland goes for nowadays. $40,000 an acre seems rather high. Mm-hmm. I don't know. How did they arrive at that?
Sure. So we actually did have an appraisal done, and it actually came in at approximately $47,000 per acre. This potential agreement actually is at $40,000 per acre. That is comparable to what other land in the area has been purchased for in the development. Wait, question?
Main Road, 2964 Cottage Grove Road. What is the Gaston Road? What is the short-term plans for this property? I mean, immediate plans.
Right.
Immediate annexation and what?
Right. So the short-term plans, currently the property owner actually leases the property out as being farmed, and that's part of the agreement that we would continue that in the short term until there is a long-term plan. So there are no short-term plans to utilize the property, and that'll be part of the recommendation that comes forth with the Facilities Advisory Committee and ultimately for the board to decide. As far as the annexation, that's not a discussion the board has had at this point. It's certainly something that will be discussed in the near future. Okay, we have a question in the back.
Can you talk for a minute about the decision to use short-term financing to fund the purchase as opposed to long-term financing?
Sure. Jared, do you want to take that?
So when we're talking about the cost of things, obviously it's the property right now is at 1.6. The reason that we chose to do short term was that there are a couple of options in the future that we could utilize that funds. We didn't want that money to come out of the classroom. And that was one of the things that was very important to us. We believe that this land is very valuable to us at this point based on what property has being purchased by other home developers. But so the short-term borrowing, as I had put together a slide here, is that when we looked at two options for short-term borrowing. One was working through the state trust fund, which we call short-term because it's 10 years, but it would really be paying for it in those 10 years. And that was going to be a budget impact of $212,000. We felt that was too big of an impact to the district to come out of Fund 38, which we had talked about before, not through a referendum. So the other side that we were looking at doing, and the one that the administration recommended, was doing a 3-year short-term borrowing by going to the markets, and you get that because you're getting a better interest rate, a lower interest rate than the state trust. But then it allows us to have some more time to talk about that. We have a few options that we want to discuss more with the public and the board. One of those is that I talked about the TID district, or the TIF district, that's closing in Monona. That TID district is one of their most successful one. It's where COPS is, it's Staples is. So whenever a TID district is set up, obviously there's funds that are going and paying. So we believe with conversations with the city of Monona, there are going to be some additional revenues that are coming our way that we could apply towards that. The other part of it is the long-range facility plan committee had recommended us selling some property. We have a strip of land that's next to Glacial Drumlin, right across from Glacial Damascus Trail, that we can, as a school district, utilize for parking or anything like that. So we were going to list that and sell that, and we could potentially use that. The other part of it is that we wanted to be able to give some options. If whatever happens through the Facility Advisory Committee, if they choose to go to referendum, then whatever's remaining, we can apply to that. So that was the purpose of the short term, was to be able just to buy some time. It's a unique opportunity that we have today based on what we're seeing with home development, the number of potential subdivisions. When we look at the property, this is Glacial Drumlin, the proposed property that we're talking about is here. This is a development, this is development, this is is being proposed a development. So when we were talking about that, we really were getting limited on a proximity of Glacial Drumlin. And so being able to come to an agreement, and as we continue to see property values across, for example, like Superintendent Olson had stated, we were able to come to an agreement based on what developers are paying surrounding us. In addition to that, being able to look at money or what land is being purchased by the Sun Prairie School District and the Verona School District, and some of the information that we were gathering, we believe that being able to come at that $40,000 was the right time to do that. And so being able to short-term borrow that, not to try to hurry up and do a referendum potentially for that. We want to make sure it's very transparent through that, but only having about a $24,000–$25,000 impact to the district, which we can cover without having impact to our educational programs.
So we have property that we've owned for 20 years and we've not utilized that. Isn't it possible to build second stories onto some of the buildings that we have to utilize the space that we already have? And then is there going to be an increase in busing because of this, this purchase and whatever is built there? And what's that amount going to be? And then lastly, can you guarantee that our taxes are not going to be increasing based on what's being decided tonight?
I can speak to the tax rate side of things. So the only way that the taxes can necessarily go up because of the purchase is if the district went to a full-fledged referendum, which then the residents of our school would have to. This increase of interest payments or whatever happens beyond the 3 years, if we do not go to referendum, would have to be absorbed within our budgets. And since our budget is not just self-driven, it's based on revenue limits and student growth. And then talking about transportation, that was part of the reason that when we looked at this property, looking at where the subdivisions are currently being planned and plotted, the subdivisions are working their way towards Madison. If we were to put this on the opposite end of town, there has been no decision on even if there was going to be a building to go there or when, or even what the grade configuration would look like. So we don't believe that there's going to be an increase because of the building. What there could be an increase for transportation is because our enrollment goes up and we provide transportation to those students.
I'll just add with, you didn't answer specifically, but with regard to those properties that the district owns, the recommendation from the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee was for the district to consider selling those properties. And that is something that we have been looking into. In addition to the 3 homes that we're talking about in the city of Monona, we also have the property on Damascus Trail just right across the street from this building that is not usable for the district. And so that's as well what we've been looking at, what it would take to sell those properties. And so that potentially brings in revenue as well that could offset the cost of any land purchase.
It was mentioned earlier that there were contingencies for the purchase of the property in addition to the approval tonight. Would annexation by the village be one of those contingencies, and what are the others, if you can speak to those?
Okay, sure. And actually, the way that the agreement's written is written very broad, that not everything is spelled out. So it's given the Board of Education the sole discretion whether or not to walk away from the agreement. And so that would be part of the final discussion. When we have the site survey done, the wetlands delineation to determine if it's buildable or not, then that would be the next discussion with the board before we made it final, that point that that you mentioned. And so we don't have a checklist of things that we're limited to. It's any and all reasons that the board would like to consider.
I have a couple questions. What is the comparable size of the land you're proposing to buy compared to what Glacial Drumlin is on currently? And back when you had the open houses for the last referendum, which was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, something like that, during those open houses, you felt at that time that we had room in our current schools that maybe wasn't being utilized, and we would have enough room for the students. Now we're looking a year and a half, 2 years later, and as I read in the local paper, it was said, I believe by you, that Glacial Drumlin is exceeding capacity. So now I'm looking 2 years later, we're exceeding capacity, at least at this school. Is that land being proposed for possibly yet another elementary school, a larger junior high or middle school? What do you project? And I guess when do you project? If 2 years ago we were fine and now 2 years later we're not, where are we in on that?
Sure. Okay, I don't know exactly what was said, during the listening sessions. I will say 2 years ago, Glacial Drumlin was at capacity, so that has not changed. And so Glacial Drumlin right now has slightly over 900 students. That's what we had for enrollment at that time as well. The biggest issue, besides every classroom, and actually we're overflowing, we've converted computer labs into classrooms. The biggest issue we have with Glacial Drumlin is that we talk about that functional capacity. We have to run 4 separate lunch periods to get all the students through. And so that's been an ongoing issue for a number of years. As far as the other buildings are the place that we're getting full, but we're not over capacity yet at this point. And so as far as the comprehensive plan, that's what this committee, as well as the board, then making decisions this next year, what will be the plan to handle future growth. So this chart shows our current enrollment trend. More importantly, this is our projection over the next 10 years. And so we do know that, based on the growth we've seen, the projections, that we are going to see that continued growth over the next 10 years. And that certainly at some point, there's no question that our current buildings will not be able to handle that capacity. And so that's the rationale for having land, so that when there is a decision made, exactly what kind of building do we need, we have land available. I would say that the discussions we've had at this point, the most likely scenario would be that any new building would be an elementary school. Right now it's K-5 where we really are having the issues in Cottage Grove. This building is we refer to as a middle school, but it's really a 6th through 8 middle school with 5th grade also attending in this building, where 5th grade is the way we really would be considered an elementary level. And so one possible solution of alleviating the overcrowding in this building is finding a solution to have 5th grade at an elementary site. Then if this just were grades 6 through 8, we'd be fine for a number of years. But that's what has to be developed, is what are we going to do? Is that the right thing? And in 5th grade, where do they go? Existing buildings, new building, that's what's going to be planned in this next year. Yes.
Them to a different school.
Right. Yeah, there is not room to move 5th grade back to Cottage Grove School. That's why they came here, because there was not space.
That school is at capacity, Cottage Grove School. So you moved them here. So now this school is at capacity. So you're just shifting where the problem is. I mean, we've got kids eating lunch, Cottage Grove School and here, 11 o'clock in the morning, 10:30 in the morning. 5th graders aren't getting recesses, which some people care, some people don't. They don't get snacks in the afternoon, even though they're eating at 11 o'clock or quarter after 11. That's an issue for me.
Yeah. My understanding is, and I wasn't here at the time that Glacial Gentleman was built, but there was not a capacity issue. At the time Glacial Gentleman was built, and 5th grade was part of that, there was plenty of space in Glacial Drumlin. I think what was unexpected is the enrollment grew much faster than predicted shortly after the school was built.
Now another 100 some odd homes coming shortly. Every 6 months here's South whatever being developed, here's West Whoville being developed. So they keep adding houses, and they're multi-family homes in some capacity or another. So that's more presumably children. Maybe there's dual income, no kid people moving in there, but I don't think they're buying 4-bedroom houses if they don't have a kid, or So again, if 2 years ago there was not an issue, and now we've added 30, 60. We've added another 100 homes, and we're about to add another 100 more. You put even one kid in there, there's 200 more kids. And I know, again, throwing you back to the open house, I know you mentioned that the open enrollment could be shifted, so not as many kids who have been open enrolled would be in. I remember you mentioning that. I guess I'm trying to get a better idea of really, before the problem comes and we don't have a school, is there some foresight thinking, okay, 2 years from now we're going to need something there?
As far as what will happen in 2 years, I mean, if you look at our enrollment this year, the increase was 18 students. The year before that, I can't see that well, but, you know, it was nearly 100. And that's what we've seen, you know, over the last 5 years. You know, so it's really mostly been a range between 50 and 100 students. This year is a little bit lower at 18. So that hasn't been a surprise. We had the original enrollment study done 3 years ago. So again, I don't know exactly how it was stated when we talked about 2 years ago. The enrollment issues have not changed. We know that long-term, we're going to have serious space needs. The big question is when? When is the time that we're going to need to do something? And at this point, you know, we have adjusted the open enrollment, as you said. We allowed, we didn't allow any students in the, you know, the majority of the students that we've allowed the last few years have been at the high school, the one place that we have space. Well, as the larger classes have come through, now we don't want to be over capacity there, so we didn't allow any ninth graders in as well. We haven't allowed middle school students for years. And the majority of the open enrollment that are new are actually not new families to the district, but families who are were in the district, moved out, and then continued on. So when you look at the open enrollment numbers, that's where the majority of them are. We've actually decreased the number of seats, you know, over these years. So this has been an issue for years. It's not going to change dramatically, you know, next year or the year after, but every year incrementally, there's more and more students. Now, fortunately, at Glacial Drumlin, we have 2 really large classes, exceptionally large, that are moving through. This year's 8th grade and this year's 9th grade were larger than normal. So as 8th grade moves on next year, we get a little bit of relief, but then again, the new students coming in, you know, will fill that up, you know. So, so we are going to have to make some decisions here, you know, relatively soon. Okay.
One moment.
Okay.
The village's application for an urban services extension indicated that the school district was looking to purchase 80 acres instead of 40. Does the district have an intention to buy more than 40 acres?
Okay. At this point, we are keeping options open. Okay, and so at this point, this is what we've have an agreement on, and then we'll continue to assess, you know, those needs.
Right now for more land?
We have spoken to other landowners.
Their property?
Yes.
Thank you.
To me, this seems like a really easy decision. Too close. To give a little anecdote, I mean, the reason that the numbers keep going up is because this is a district where we've always invested in our schools and, you know, done our best to fund the growth that we need. And when the state limits our ability to fund the schools, we've gone to referendum when we needed to and supported the schools by large margins. As a little anecdata, my wife and I, we moved here when our son was entering kindergarten because Monona Grove is a great district and there's a history of supporting education. And 2 houses down, they did the same thing when their daughter was about to enter 4K. Across the street, they came when their kids were starting school. I think this guy says he did too. And that benefits everybody, whether or not we have kids in schools, because everybody's property values go up because we're a growing district. And that's a cycle that builds on itself. And it benefits the kids for sure, but it benefits property owners. So we know we need the space. We know that this is an opportunity that you can see from the map. There's not a lot of empty space left around Glacial Drumlin. I think the space being next to Glacial Drumlin gives the district a lot of options, gives the planning committee a lot of options to figure out what the best use for it is. But to me, it seems like an easy decision. So.
I have another question regarding the property in Madison, the 3 properties. I didn't understand what our plans on utilizing that was, and what is the value of that property if we aren't utilizing it and can't, and the city won't give it up. What's the sense in holding that? The value of that should be almost the amount of this 40 acres we're talking about now.
So the 3 properties in the city of Monona, the one property is a house right on Monona Drive. That house is not livable. It needs to be raised, and it will be at some point in the future, but it has to go through the approval process with the city of Madison. One of the challenges we have is we have a plan in place to raise that house and rebuild the tennis courts and move them over, partly onto that property. The problem is we don't have the money right now to rebuild those tennis courts, and to get a plan approved, you have to act on it within a year or you lose that, permit. So that's why we are sitting with a plan, waiting for the right time. That's something we move forward with. The other 2 houses are actually on Jerome Street, which is on the other side of the tennis courts. And those houses are also in a state of disrepair. I think they could go back on the market, but part of the challenge there again is working out an agreement with the city that we'd like to utilize some of the property, with the tennis courts for the future. And so that's something that I would expect our board to be making a decision on in this next year about, are we going to put those houses on the market, or are we going to look to raise those as well and just keep that space. So as far as the property value, the last appraisal that was done on those properties was about 5 years ago, and the appraisal was something like about $80,000 for each property.
One last question. So you talk about the problem you have with the neighborhood association in Madison with the houses we have now. This particular parcel, which is almost at the farthest end of the village's extraterritorial jurisdiction, so you are developing at the farthest westerly point of the village of Cottage Grove. So again, there is a point at which the city of Madison's line comes and you can't annex into the village from there. So you're going further west. Also, all 3 parcels around this are planned for residential development. Putting in a school is one thing. Putting in sports facilities is a whole nother issue. We have had issues in the past, and again, this is part of the concern, I guess, that I have is, have you had communications with the village and the town to determine whether your uses will be, to a certain degree, in agreement with what you're going to have there? It's nice to put in sports facilities, but if you don't have transportation access, again, you're going to be running buses on town roads. You have to have an agreement with them. You're going to be having to run buses or traffic to sporting facilities on village roads, which may not have been built to that standard. So again, you're asking us to approve something knowing the past history of this building and every building that's been built in the village, and to a certain degree with the high school. The history has been very poor planning in terms of those additional costs, and then all of a sudden everything is higher. So again, you're asking us to approve something where we don't know, A, is it a building? It's 40 acres. Is it sports facilities, baseball diamonds, softball diamonds, all things we need. We agree on that. But is that location suitable for that? Right. You're paying a lot of money to put in sports facilities at $1.6 million.
Yeah. And that's part of the piece right now, going through that assessment problem. As far as have we had discussions with the folks in the village and town? Informally, yes. I mean, we've been in regular communication with folks from the village. We do not have an agreement or have had a formal discussion about the annexation and those sorts of things. But as far as where it fits in with the master plan and so on, before we began pursuing the properties, yes, we had those discussions. That would be the next step, is to continue those discussions while we still are in this 60-day period before the board would make a final decision on whether to execute the agreement.
I'd like to go back to the idea that the district is looking to purchase 40 additional acres that haven't been brought up at this meeting tonight. Can you tell me why it's being done piecemeal and why there was no mention of the second 40 acres?
There is no formal proposal to purchase 80 acres. Okay, what we've had with the recommendation from the Long Range Planning Committee was to consider the viability of properties adjacent to Glacial Drumlin. We approached the owners of those properties. We were able to reach agreement with one. Okay? And so at this point, that is all that's on the table. And there, as far as the other property, might that be needed? Might there be something negotiated? That's to be determined. At this point, there is no agreement.
Okay. So, was there any thought of expanding the elementary schools and, you know, moving some of the grades back, that kind of thing? You know, doing what we can with what we have currently, and really, when the time comes to actually pay for whatever we're going to purchase, you know, in cash. That's just my take on that there. Do we have approval to transition the land from farmland to industrial? And what will the back taxes be on the land when we transition the purpose of the land?
Sure. We would have to go through that process. If the district finalized the purchase, then the next step would be to work with, you know, the village and town as far as you know, the use of that. As a school district, we don't pay taxes.
Just a follow-up question. I propose that this be taken to referendum instead of being done behind closed doors here, so that we can hear from all the residents.
Was there a question?
Yes. This really should be taken to referendum.
Okay. Well, based on state statutes, the authority to purchase property is done at an annual meeting. And referendums are for financing, and as mentioned, there are a couple of different options, you know, for that. But the approval process is here tonight.
Land, because I don't believe that's accurate. A school district could choose, if it opted to go the referendum route to purchase land. You're not saying that you're prohibited.
My understanding is that you could do an advisory referendum at any time, but the authority to purchase must occur at an annual meeting.
The authority to purchase, but the financing, you could go to referendum. Once it's approved here, you could say, do we have the authority to purchase? And then the board could choose to go to referendum for the actual financing, which would resolve the deal.
Yes. Yeah.
As a follow-up to what this young lady back here was talking about, units for sale in Cottage Grove, the village, right now there are 190 units available behind the bank building. And the village has already purchased the Helglen property with another 60 homes. And, sorry, the village has already purchased the Helglen property. The village is trying to annex Shady Grove, and that's another 100 units. And in addition, there are units available just north of the school here. There are 350 units or so available to be built on, and more kids. And I'm not sure that's going to help us tonight with this discussion or not, but we got to get the village to slow down a little bit, I think.
Speaking of the properties that are being annexed in, or the subdivisions that are being plotted, so part of the process that we have done as a school district that dates back to 3-4 years ago is we hired Vanderwall and Associates to do our initial enrollment study. Part of that process is that they met with the municipality of Monona, both the village of Cottage Grove and the town of Cottage Grove. We also then have went back and we've updated that again in March of 2016. So those subdivisions that you're talking about are included in our enrollment projections. That's what we have tried to do as a district, is to be proactive. When we have grown over the last 5 years or so of 300 students, I wasn't here for the glacial Drummond. I'm not for sure what data was being utilized. The district had used Applied Population Lab through the UW system. We've actually hired them in addition to the Vanderwall Associates to assist us with that. And we will continue to update that. The enrollment study was not based on just looking at the numbers behind closed doors. It was meeting with the municipalities to find out what's in the planning stages. were they aware of certain properties? Because a lot of time property owners will make contact with each of the municipalities first to let them know that they're interested in doing that. I think we've had some great conversations, but I definitely wanted to bring up that Vanderbilt has reached out, and so that's why you're starting to see some of those spikes. Those spikes, if we only grew by 18 students this year, because none of those subdivisions have developed. But that's why we're having the conversation to talk about the land tonight, is that we don't want this land that is adjacent to Glacial Drumlin to be potentially purchased by a developer, where then we will potentially find ourselves in the same situation we were with Taylor Prairie. Taylor Prairie was actually purchased or worked through with a developer. That land is very small. We have parking issues, we have bus issues, because we don't have much more land beyond that. So trying to be on the proactive side of things, that's why the Facility Advisory Committee is in play as well. They are going to walk through this. There will be community surveys, and then ultimately the board has to make the final decision on if there's going to be any type of building. What I can say is that yes, we don't have a plan today to tell you that we're going to put athletic complexes. We don't have a plan today we're putting a building, but we don't want that property to go away and then we find ourselves being in the most inconvenient area where we would see increased transportation costs. If we happen to find ourselves at the south part of the village where there's no necessarily subdivisions being plotted, we would be transporting kids because they would be crossing railroad tracks. It would be classified as it would be classified as a hazardous area beyond a 2-mile walk zone. So what we've believed is, based on what those plans are being, is we feel this is the best situation of location for the land. And going back to financing, obviously if the board decides to move forward, it would be something that would be approved by the electorate through a referendum. But as of right now, we're looking at other options as well.
Right back. I've been on the board for quite some time, and when we look at, one of the things we've learned is that we can look at these enrollment projections all we want, but we don't have control over the enrollment, how many students are in our district. That's a function of the cities and the villages in our district, and it's hard to project. It depends on the economy. It depends on a lot of factors. What we have to do is be prepared for what might happen. There is a lot of development. The hard part about being prepared is the land. Once we have the land, we can build a building at the time of our choosing, and we can build a building that fits our needs. But the land isn't necessarily available when we need it. Like this property here, the land was purchased well before built. It was the board was trying to get ahead, look ahead, do the best they could to anticipate future needs, and bought the land, and it sat for a while before the building was built on. And we're trying to do the same thing here. It would be nice to have everything worked out, all of the agreements with the village, every last bit of thing worked out. But in reality, to go through all that process, get that all done, the land probably wouldn't be available at that anymore by the time we had been through that. We have an opportunity to build this land. It's fungible. It's one of the smallest parts of the cost of a new building. It's also the most fungible for the district. If we decide in the future that we can't utilize this land, we can sell this land without incurring a significant cost. Our carrying cost for this land, as you point, was $23,000 a year. So it's relatively small cost to the district to give us the flexibility to do what we're going to need to do, what we will probably need to do. Don't know what we're going to need to do, what we're probably going to need to do in the in the foreseeable future. But we have this opportunity. That's why we're here tonight. It's convenient. It's centrally located to much of the development that we'll be seeing in the future. So to the best of our ability to anticipate this, one of the most, it's a good bet, this land. It's a good bet that we're going to need to use it in the future, and it's a pretty good place for us to have it. Thanks.
Owner in this area, and not to condemn the people that have the land for sale. They are friends, neighbors of mine, but I think the price is a little bit high. I don't know where they're basing this all off of. Because in this area, the land that has sold has been a lot less. And to go into the purchase at the time when they bought this land, they had an option to buy 90 acres here. And I kept telling the superintendent at the time, take it all. And he said, we don't need that much land. And now all of a sudden, we need land. And it might not have been your board, you know, that was on at the time. But I know the whole situation here. And they could have bought this whole 90 for less than $10,000 an acre. But I don't want to take away from the landowners. Like I said, I'm a landowner too, but I believe that $40,000 an acre is exceeding more than what I think they could get. If they're basing it on lots only and development, I think that's where they're getting this price per acre basing. And another answer to the Taylor Prairie School, that you don't have much land, that's because the developer ended up talking the town, the school board, into having a piece of crap land in a hole that they couldn't develop, and so pass it on to the school. So it was no favor from the developer. I don't know what, people just don't understand that developers will push a lot of crap on somebody else.
Hi, Rebecca Ninke. I don't know farmland prices, but I do know that the lots across the tree line from that property are selling for $115,000 for a third of an acre. So I think that if we don't purchase this as a district, it's going to be in the hands of the developer within months. The original plan was that Morning Drove and Pheasant Run and the street behind it would go through, and so this would be cutting that off, which I think is all right. Can I call the question? Sorry. I move that we call the question.
So we need a second. Okay, thank you. So we've had a motion and a second to call the question. Deep breath. We're going to first go with a hand vote, and hopefully that will work. If we have something that looks close, then we can move to a paper ballot. If that's correct. Okay. Correct. Yes. Yes, we will go with hand count first. All right, thank you. So we are currently going to take a vote then on the resolution authorizing site acquisition. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. Hold the phone, folks. Try me again. Thank you. All right, so we're going to vote on the call of the question. Is that correct? The motion to close discussion. Thanks, everybody. It's been a long day. All right, we can do this. All those in favor of, okay, so sorry, of calling the question and closing debate, please indicate your approval by raising your hand. All those in favor? Thank you. All those opposed? All right. That motion carries. It carries, yes, 2/3. All right. Okay. We now move to vote on the approval of the resolution regarding the property. And again, we'll do a hand vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? All right. And that motion carries. Thank you. This brings us to section M of our agenda. At this time, other pieces of business can be brought at an annual meeting. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, this is Carrie Robbins. I just have a quick announcement that I'm nearing the end of my term on the board. I'll be done, and I will not be running for re-election. So for all of you here tonight, I thought this was a great captive audience to encourage some of you to consider running, because there will be an open seat, which is a great time to run.
Thank you. Other business. All right, seeing none, we'll look for a motion for adjournment from the floor. Thank you. Yep. And a second. Thank you, John. And then a vote as well. All those in favor, say aye. We can do a voice vote on this. Let's do a voice vote, okay. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay. We are adjourned. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.